The superpower that every citizen has is the ability to control where they spend their time, money, and attention. By focusing these on supporting local businesses, you are having a profound impact on your friends, your family, and your local community. So if you want to change the world, you can start with buying local. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Sarah Craig.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us here, Buying Local Saratoga. So, and you're from Caffé Lena, which,
correct.
It's one of those things where needs no introduction. I mean, I think everyone has at least heard of Caffé Lena in some way, shape, or form. But why don't you tell us a little bit about Caffé Lena, about what Caffé Lena is and does, and what your role is there?
Sure. Our mission is to bring music, connection, and learning to Saratoga Springs. And we have nightly events. We have music, poetry, storytelling, a stage for the community to participate in, lots of open mics and things like that midweek. And then come the weekend, we have world famous headliners rolling in to play in what is a very intimate, exquisite sound, really cozy venue with deep history. That's actually one of the best known small venues in anywhere, and certainly in the United States. It's been in longer operation than any other small venue in the country. It's opened in 1960 at the height of the folk boom, and it's been going strong ever since. Well, sometimes not so strong. The 80s weren't too strong. The early 90s weren't too strong, but since then we've really been picking up steam. So we do, between music lessons and community events and concerts, about 900 different events a year.
That's crazy.
It's totally crazy. I don't know how we do it.
It's usually I'm like, what, 900?
Yeah.
That's I don't even understand how you logistically make that happen.
We touch a lot of people. We have things happening in person in our little space in downtown Saratoga Springs on Phila Street. We also have a lot that happens online. So we have group music lessons, for example, that meet online. We have things like this, conversations that happen online that we stream through our various platforms. Yeah. But really the heart and soul of what happens is those weekend concerts.
So, and now you must have a huge staff.
Well, so Michael, you know how I was running a little bit late today?
Yeah. I thought you were right on time.
Actually, it does feel like a huge staff, I'll be honest with you, because up until 2016, we just had 1, 2, or 3 people doing everything. And now we have between part-time and full-time people, about 10 on staff right now. Yeah.
Yeah. I was based on just 900 events, that doesn't sound like, I can't imagine what it must be like day to day for everybody trying to handle all the details that goes into everything that you're doing.
Yeah, it is. It takes a tremendous amount of coordination, and it's really interesting because when you're moving from being a small business run by 1 or 2 people that are just kind of making it their lives 24/7 to being a responsible employer and following conventional business practices and trying to coordinate a staff of 10. That's a whole different skill set that has nothing to do with music.
Right.
Has nothing to do with art. It has to do with business skills. And that was something that I wasn't sure why things were so hard for a couple of years there until we got a new board president, Jim Mastriani, who's a great businessman in Saratoga. And he bought me the E-Myth.
Yeah, that's a great book. I love that book.
I think it sold something like 500 quadrillion copies.
Yeah.
And basically anybody who wants to know anything about business has to start with the E-Myth.
Yeah, it's a great book.
And it basically says that, you get into a business because you have a passion for whatever it is. And he uses the example of baking pies. So in our case, it's, putting on concerts. And the point of running a business, though, is not to be the guy putting on the concerts or the guy baking the pies. The point is to create the structure and the coordination for that to be able to happen. And so I realized that even though I had been working at Caffé Lena for decades at that point, about 20-something years, I didn't know the first thing about running a business with a staff.
Sure.
And so he knew that I was an avid reader and very eager to learn, and he just kept sending me books in the mail. I'd get a little unmarked envelope, and I'd open it up, and this is what I'm going to learn next. And I learned a lot. I mean, I still am kind of a newbie in that area, but I've learned a lot more about management, what it takes to coordinate people, how to just keep the lines of communication open and check all the boxes and be very organized.
So now you said things kind of changed 2016. What was the catalyst to that change?
Yeah, the catalyst actually had come a year or two before that, when the city of Saratoga Springs had gotten increasingly concerned about the condition of our building and finally said, if you don't make some very significant repairs to this building, we're going to have to condemn it. And so we had been dancing around doing a big renovation on the building for a long time, but it's an overwhelmingly large project, especially when you have a couple of staff people.
Yeah.
And so, and up to that point, for us, a really good, successful fundraiser was, wow, we raised $1,500. And we were looking at a price tag of, we thought at the outset, about $1.2 million.
Oh, wow.
So how to get from where we were to an organization that could raise that kind of money? Well, we really needed to put the rocket boosters on. And frankly, there's nothing like being told that you're going to lose the home of the longest running folk music coffee house in the country, a legendary institution, to light a fire under you. So we did what we needed to do. We did raise the money, but the renovation happened through the course of 2016, and we reopened in 2017 with the new facility that we have now, which is the same four walls, stage in the same corner, same bricks behind the stage. We kind of hung on to as much of the historical look and feel as we could, but in a sense, it's almost a completely reconstructed building.
Wow. And now, are you a not-for-profit or are you a for-profit business?
No, we're nonprofit. And so when Lena Spencer and her husband Bill opened the venue back in 1960, they were opening it as a conventional small business. And she was, operating in the way that a lot of nonprofits operate. She had a lot of people just kind of helping her out. And she really wasn't in it for the money. She was in it just to make the music. She was very resistant, though, to becoming a nonprofit organization. So she ran it as a for-profit until she passed away in 1989. And then the people who were kind of around her and helping her form the nonprofit at that point.
I gotcha. Okay. So, and maybe give me, or give us really, give us a little bit more of the history on it, right? Because that's just what a great story that you have. So, tell us a little, expand on what you just said, right? The origins with.
Sure. I'll tell you a little bit about it. And I will also just say that if anybody kind of takes an interest in the history of the place, WMHT made a documentary about Lena Spencer 3 years ago, something like that. I don't know. It's, if you just go to wmht.org/Lena, you will find the documentary on their website, and it's a wonderful piece. But she was from the Boston area. She grew up in a very traditional Italian family. Her name is Pasqualina Rosa Nargi Spencer, and she was the only female in her family. Her mother died when she was quite young. Her sister died when she was young. Her twin sister died. It was just a really, rough spot of luck for the family. So she grew up as the only female and was expected to do a lot of only traditional female stuff, taking care of the household, making sure people were fed and cleaned and all of that. She took care of her father and brothers and uncle. And she just was one of those people who was born with art in her soul. and she loved poetry and literature, and particularly she loved theater, and she wanted to be an actress. She ran away from home in her early 20s. She went to New York. She tried to establish herself as an actress. She was discovered by uncles, was brought back to Massachusetts to get back to work. Didn't last too long, and she found somebody to marry, and his name was Bill Spencer. So he was a sculptor at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston at their museum school. And they had this dream that they cooked up. You know, they'd known each other just, I think, weeks, decided to get married, came up to Saratoga Springs to visit a friend. And bear in mind, this is 1959, and Saratoga was a very different place. Mm-hmm. It was kind of a backwater a little bit, you know, a little down at the heels at that point, a lot of boarded up storefronts. And as a lot of people know, those are the kinds of places where real estate is inexpensive, and it's possible to start interesting, quirky little enterprises like a coffee house. Mm-hmm. So they found this loft space on Philo Street and decided to set up this coffee house, which was kind of all the rage at the time. It was the middle of something called the Folk Revival, which was really hot in New York City, you know, in Greenwich Village, and there were all these folk clubs, and that was the scene that spawned people like Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell and, you know, Tom Paxton and lots of people who became household names. So
some of which that have been to Caffé Lena and performed there, which I think is amazing too, which we'll have to give us the rundown of the list, you know.
So they started this place, and their plan had been that they would just run it for a couple of years and, you know, make a lot of money and then just go to Europe and live this bohemian lifestyle in Europe.
Like every entrepreneur's, right? Like the optimism that you have about how quickly you're going to make vast sums of money is... we all have it. It's hilarious.
It's an enduring part of human nature. It's a beautiful thing.
It is. It really is.
So Bill didn't last too long. He stuck around for a couple of years, and he was teaching up at Skidmore. He fell in love with one of his students and left and went back to Boston with one of his students and left Lena with this venue. At that point, she had just been doing the baking in the kitchen, and he was the one programming the music and kind of being on stage and introducing people. So she had a big decision to make, and she decided to go for it. And, you know, as they say, the rest is history. Yeah. She did everything she could to help her musicians. She put them up sometimes for weeks and months at a time at her apartment. She cooked for people. She just welcomed them in like family. And I think that whole circle of musicians really became like her family. Mm-hmm. And she was loved, deeply loved by the people who had been helped by her. And the people in the audience, too. They saw her devotion and really appreciated that. And so in the 80s, even though business was terrible, so bad that she was living at the venue. Mm-hmm. She couldn't afford an apartment anymore. She got an honorary doctorate from Skidmore, and Saratoga declared a Lena Spencer Day. They renamed a street after her. It became Lena Lane next to the cafe. So it's a story of a lot of joy, a lot of fun, a lot of struggle, and just profound commitment to this institution that she created.
It sounds amazing. Yeah. And there's a documentary you said, which I did not know that. So
yeah, wmht.org/Lena. Okay. It's a great piece. They came up with all kinds of information and stories and photographs that none of us had seen before, and we thought we knew everything. We particularly thought we knew everything because when the venue turned 50 in 2010, the Library of Congress took an interest in the Caffé Lena archives and actually we were able to give them loads and loads of just stuff that had been at the cafe, that had been sitting over at the Saratoga History Museum since Lena died. They organized, digitized it, and made it available as an archive through the Library of Congress, through the American Folklife Center, for researchers to be able to go through. So that's online too. That's history.caffelena.org.
Okay.
Yeah. That's
great. So the list, right? Give us the rundown. Dylan played there, right?
Yep, Dylan did play. He played. So it used to be back in the old days, people would play not one show, but they would play for a whole weekend. They do what we would think of as kind of a mini residency. So Dylan did a couple of weekends, 1961 and 62. He played. There's some wonderful old black and white photos that are from the second visit in 62. But yeah, I mean, basically anybody who was part of the folk scene through the 60s, 70s, and 80s has played at Caffé Lena. And, you know, I think I'm gonna just be a little bit modest and a little bit realistic here to say that any venue that is geared toward emerging artists is going to have these stories if they stick around long enough. There's somebody who's going to break out, and you never know who it's going to be. And so if, for example, a 12-year-old kid shows up at your open mic with long blonde hair and a little black hat, and he gets on stage and he does an amazing original song and then a nice cover song, and you give him an opening slot and you think that, you know, you've done him a favor, you just might turn on the TV a few months later and find him winning The Voice.
Right. Are you talking about anybody specific here?
Well, for example, Sawyer Fredericks would fit into that category. So, you know, I think that the important point is that small venues are the building block of the whole music world. They are the foundation of the music world. Nobody starts their career at SPAC. Nobody starts their career at Universal Preservation Hall or at Carnegie Hall or at, you know, any of these other wonderful venues that everybody has heard of. They start their careers at places like Caffé Lena, if they're lucky, or any number of, you know, small stages out there that are run by people who are really devoted to music. And so actually it was interesting because during the pandemic, there were people who love music, who have deep pockets, who stepped out of the woodwork and said, we need to save small venues. There was a lot of help out there for the large venues because they are anchors of downtown economies. They play a slightly different role. But as far as the art form of independent music goes, it was the small venues that some people looked at. And so we got some really good assistance to get through the pandemic.
Yeah.
Bogey's Pub and Grill at Bay Meadows Golf Club. Not just for hungry golfers, they have a little something for everyone. The pub side offers a nice friendly atmosphere, televisions to watch your favorite sporting events, booths for a nice lunch, a pool table, PGA golf simulators with over 80 courses. They also have a formal dining room if you're looking for a more traditional dining space.
Now, that just makes me think of too about we have a pretty vast art community here in Saratoga Springs, right? I don't know if all of our listeners realize that or not, but I mean, when you look around, there are a lot of things happening, you know, whether from exit 14 at Yaddo all the way across town, into town. So give us a little bit about, you know, what it's like for Caffé Lena to exist. And I don't know if compete's the right word, but I almost feel like maybe it is because there's only so much audience to go around, right? So how do you function in that kind of environment when art is everywhere?
Well, you know, I think that we see it as an asset. And, you know, you might say there's only a certain number of ticket buyers to go around. And, you know, in a sense, there is truth to that. But I think that if you talk to Elizabeth Sobel over at SPAC, she would say, how many potential ticket buyers are there? 7 billion,
right.
you know?
Sure.
And so, I think that what we've seen is that we're really at the point in Saratoga now where we have a critical mass of artistic happenings to be able to become a destination for people who are interested in either that way of life, who might want to actually move here, or who are simply looking for a really special weekend that just reinvigorates their creativity. And so they come and visit for a weekend. And then as far as, people who live here year round, it's fun to talk to people in the audience, to just walk up to a table and, they might be at Caffé Lena for the first time. And I always, one of my first questions is, so where else do you go for music? Where else do you like? And I love to hear about all the different places people go to. I think what's important as far as, creating a climate of cooperation rather than competition is a couple of things. One is, you need to know who you are. You can't be everything for everyone. And so, I think that these days we would say you have to be true to your brand. Okay, well, so that's one way of looking at it, that you do define what your brand is and what, who you want to be to your customers. But I think there's also just something in a space that tells you if it's right or wrong for the space. So, we are rootsy. That's what we are. We gear ourselves toward emerging artists, or people who are kind of legends of singer-songwriter craft or folk craft, who, honor the legacy of the space and want to come play there. That could be somebody like Richard Thompson, who played with us last summer, Judy Collins, who was there a couple of years ago. People who are known worldwide and never play small clubs anymore, but because it's Caffé Lena, they want to come. And then on the other hand, you just get bands that are just absolutely tearing it up and like burning up the airwaves and getting headline slots at all the major festivals and getting really well reviewed in Rolling Stone and all of this kind of stuff. And but they're brand new to the market. They never played around upstate New York before. And so we do a lot of that kind of music. We gear our stage toward primarily acoustic performances. So I don't mean unamplified, but I mean fiddle, banjo, guitar. Not to say that we don't do plenty of shows with drums and big bass amps and stuff like that. But I think, so there's the instrumentation, and that's one part of it. But the other part of it is the way that people interact with the audience. And that's one of the things that I really look for, is a band that likes to tell stories, likes to connect deeply with the audience, is feeding off of the audience's energy as much as they are giving something to the audience. There are a lot of people who play in the larger halls who have gotten very used to being behind a wall of lights and not really seeing who's out there and just kind of doing their thing. And then, maybe there are no real introductions to the songs. It could be just one song flowing into the next, into the next, or with silence in between. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that's much more, has a kitchen table kind of feel. Everybody's gathered around. We're going to do a show together.
Yeah. Yeah. And how many people can you fit?
110.
110. So I mean, that's, I love the word intimate as far as, because it really does describe it, right? Like 110 is a lot of people. Not like going to a SPAC show, right? But again, like you said, like it gives the interaction between audience and performer, which is just amazing. Right?
It is intimate, and it's a listening room. We struggle sometimes, like, are we a folk club? Like, there are people who come to Caffé Lena who say, I love everything that you do, but I don't think of myself as a folk music fan.
That's interesting.
And so there's a lot that we do that I think that people would never consider to be folk music. They would consider it to be pop or rock or global or jazz or, whatever. Right. They would call it something else. They wouldn't call it folk music, singer-songwriter. So, but what's always there is that it's a listening room. So the audience is there to give their undivided attention to the stage. They might be hooting and hollering. They might be singing along with a song if they're asked to. They might be, laughing really loud. So it's not like a library or anything like that. But all the energy goes to the stage. It's not people talking to each other and across chatting.
That's interesting. So I'm just thinking about that word rootsy. I think that's such a great word, right? And from a genre standpoint, right? So you threw out a lot of stuff there, but are you still mainly folk music, or does it really just change from show to show to show, from day to day to day?
I think that there's always a lineage to be traced in our music. So, as I say when I'm talking to new bands and, people are trying to decide if the venues are a good fit for them, I basically want to know if they're familiar with American roots music. So traditional folk music or traditional like blues from the Mississippi Delta, some of these musical styles that are inherently American and have informed rock and roll and everything that's come since. And so that, American music, our unique musical style, is an amalgam of the music that was brought by like Scots-Irish people and slaves. That's really what our music is. It's an amalgam of those two. And how did that meet? That met mostly in the South. Those two traditions merged with each other and created a unique sound and unique instrumentation that then led to the blues, that led to bluegrass, that led to rock and roll, that led to early jazz styles in New Orleans. And then, all of those styles have become the pop music that we have today. But it all traces its lineage back to these styles of music that were brought by the people who came here as immigrants, starting in 1620.
So the weekends are, let's say, reserved for bigger acts, right? More well-known stuff. Is that fair, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, those are the nights when we're going to be charging a ticket price that generally ranges anywhere from, at the very lowest occasional end, $18 up to, it could be $75. It depends on who's playing.
Which is all very reasonable, by the way. When you look at ticket pricing right now for a lot of shows out there, it is unbelievably expensive. So that is very reasonable for.
Well, that's, you actually, you bring up an interesting point. I have tried really hard not to raise ticket prices, but yet I want to put more money into the pockets of our musicians because they are facing increased travel costs and it costs more for gas, it costs more for hotels, it costs more for meals.
Yeah, everything is more expensive now.
Yeah, and so to put a little perspective on that, sometimes these tours were booked a year ago when the prices were A, and now the prices are B, but all the deals are locked in, and they're not going to be walking out with any more money just because the prices went up. Like, there's a long lag time in, of trying to turn the ship. And so you can't just jack ticket prices up, all of a sudden. So one thing we've tried to do is look for other ways to put revenue in their pockets. And because bear in mind, we're a nonprofit organization, and so our motivation is to serve the music, right? And to serve the people who make the music and the people who love the music. So we have something called Caffé Lena .tv, which is our live streaming platform.
Cool.
And during the pandemic, we were streaming nightly out on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, and it was all free. And there was a donation jar, and people threw in donations, and it was unbelievable, and it kept a lot of people afloat. It was a beautiful thing. After the pandemic, we said this is an important It is important that we not be giving this away because it will erode the value of people's music. People need to pay for this, and they need to understand that artists are there as professionals to make a living, and they deserve compensation, just like the guy who fixes your car.
Right. They got to eat.
Right. They got to eat. And so we started CaffeLena.tv, which is a subscription-based platform where you can subscribe for a nominal fee, or you can buy a single show ticket, and it's, again, a nominal fee. It's like between $5 and $10 generally to watch a show. But we give 100% of that individual ticket money to the musicians. And there are musicians that have walked out with an extra $1,000 because of that. And that makes a huge difference to them. We also do not take a cut of their merchandise sales. Merchandise sales have become a really important survival tactic for bands because you can't make money selling records the way that you used to. So much music is out there on platforms like Spotify, and people don't buy records anymore. They just listen on Spotify, and the musicians get virtually no compensation for those streams. So they have to sell stuff like T-shirts and mugs and, other tchotchkes like that. So a lot of venues will take a cut of that, sometimes as much as 20%, and Caffé Lena does not do that. So, anything that we can do to support the artists, we do. And we are trying really hard to keep ticket prices, down, reasonable. We want people to be able to come to the venue and not be squeezed out. Are they going to go up some? They'll have to. There's kind of no way around it, but we'll keep it to a minimum. We're not going to look at it as a great opportunity to just double.
Right. Right. Which seems to be happening a lot these days.
The math is so easy.
Right.
Double it.
That's it. That's all you got to do. So I know that we're kind of running short on time, but there was one question that I had for you that before we got started, you had mentioned that I'd say post-pandemic, but I guess we're still kind of in it. But it's, 2020 was the big shutdown year, right? And so for most people, 2021 was kind of stepping back out, rebuilding. 2022, I feel like it's still for a lot of companies, a lot of businesses out there, especially locally, that, 2022 is still kind of a rebuilding year. But one thing you had said was that coming out of 2020, that things, once you opened back up, that things really picked up for you, if I heard you correctly.
Let me change what I said then. Okay.
Or you might have said it differently. That's what I heard. But.
Let me correct any misimpression I might have made. So let me just back up just a minute. So in 2020, yes, we shut down like everybody else did in March. And we, at that point, we were still allowed to have some bands in the space, and we just live streamed them with no audience in the house. We started calling it the Stay Home Sessions on March 14th, 2020. And we had hundreds of people online watching these live streams. We had actually been live streaming our concerts since 2012. Okay. So we had the personnel and the equipment and the experience to be able to do it at a very high level, to be able to do it well. So then we got the word that workplaces, were only going to be allowed to have one person in the space. So at that point, we had this day where we just brought in band after band after band, and we filmed all of these streams that we could then show later. And during that period, when we couldn't have anybody there, and we just had these, bunch of shows in the can that we were unrolling each night, we were applying to Empire Development to become an essential business.
Gotcha.
And so they actually, after application number 4, please, we were saying, they actually did allow us to be redesignated from being a live performance venue to being a broadcast studio. So they called us a broadcast studio for the duration of the shutdown, and we had live music in there every night. And our people who are watching generated more than $100,000 in tip revenue for regional artists, a lot of them from Saratoga.
That's amazing.
And from the surrounding area. And so it was incredibly exciting to be able to be of use in that moment. And then when we reopened in April of 2021 with very 25% capacity, I think we were allowed to reopen, we saw our viewership on the live stream just drop precipitously because people felt like, okay, the venue's okay now. They can reopen,
Right.
they can make some money. And so things got pretty grim there for a little while.
Okay.
And so it's a matter of just slowly rebuilding. In 2022, when things were still just bouncing back very, very slowly for us, and in fact, that was the case for many performing arts venues, we decided to do a little bit of surveying to see what was going on. And I thought, I can think of probably 200-300 people who used to come regularly
Sure.
in 2019 who haven't come back. And we actually found that it was more than 2,000 people who had been regular ticket buyers in 2019 who had not been back to the venue. And this is deep into 2022. And so then we tried to find out why, and we got some good information about that. But the conclusion was that don't bother trying to win back the people who aren't going to come back. There are some people who have made changes in their life who are no longer ever going to be comfortable with indoor performing arts, who are just doing other things now. Forget about it. Focus on new people.
Wow.
And once we started doing that, we started having some success rebuilding. And we focused all our energy on just getting first-time people. So at the beginning of this conversation, you said Caffé Lena needs no introduction. Everybody's heard of it. It's true that a lot of people have heard of the place. Not everybody, but a lot of people have. It's amazing how many of those people have never been there.
Yeah.
People who like music, who have lived in Saratoga for decades and don't realize that one of the most exquisite, irreplicable small venues in the world is right here in their town, and they haven't shown up for a show. And so we tried to change that, and we've had a lot of luck. And now not only do we have an unprecedented number of new people in the seats, but an unprecedented number of new members, new volunteers, new lifeblood coming into the venue. So it's a beautiful thing. And just, I would say, starting around December of 2022, we finally started to feel like, my gosh, it feels like 2019 again.
Oh,
and
nice.
Now the shows are really filling up again.
So I was completely off.
Skyzone Trampoline Park, Queensbury. Skyzone can set you up with a great birthday party for your kids and less hassle for all of you parents. They also offer general admission tickets and memberships with exclusive discounts and access to member-only events.
Well, I'm glad that it's rebounding then, and but true to the fact that for so many businesses locally, that 2022 is still a rebuilding year.
Totally.
And I know that it's interesting how everybody experienced the last few years in different realms. Like there's the people that were shut down, and then the people that have spent the last couple of years rebuilding, and then there's other people that they had so much success throughout the pandemic that they were just one of those industries that like I have a couple of friends that own cleaning companies, and they were just, or construction or any of the, where it was just like, oh yeah, there's so much work they didn't know what to do with themselves.
Right.
So it's interesting to hear how it impacted you and, climbing out of it and moving forward. So now I know that you talked about what goes on the weekends. What's Sunday through Thursday look like for?
Well, Sunday is part of the weekend for us, and Thursday's actually part of our weekend.
Man, I love this. The Thursday through Sunday weekend. That sounds amazing.
Come for no other reason than that. And so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is a lot of what I would call community programming. Okay. So it ranges from things like tonight we have a storytelling open mic, we have poetry open mic. Every Monday we have just a regular open mic. But when I say regular, it's actually the best open mic in the region.
Yeah.
It's a listening room environment. It's a place where original music is encouraged, and it's all ages, and there's no alcohol. And so it's a pretty different kind of atmosphere.
Yeah.
And then we also have, like tomorrow, the place is going to be filled morning and noon with groups of people doing music lessons. So we have music lessons for seniors in the early daytime hours, where they can come in and learn to jam together and play any kind of instrument, any kind of like string band instrument that they want, but it's just really social and get your hands moving and get your brain doing something fresh and new, and people form friendships. It's really wonderful. And then after school, we have groups of children coming in doing the same thing. Nice. And so it's a way of just taking that folk music tradition and putting it into new hands and seeing what the next generation does with it. And then another initiative we have is basically serving as an amplifier of the work that is being done by nonprofit organizations in Saratoga. So we have, during the pandemic, one of the things that we did with our live stream was we reached out to different nonprofits and said, you guys have lost your annual fundraiser. You've kind of just like, a lot of organizations just kind of like disappeared because they couldn't do their public facing work that they are normally known for. So we brought them in to sit in front of the mic, kind of like what you're doing right now. We did a lunchtime series where we just put different nonprofit leaders on stage. They got to share their message. We also produced live stream fundraisers for a whole bunch of different organizations, everything from the Veterans and Community Housing Coalition to Gateway House of Peace, which takes care of people when they're dying, to Bike-a-Toga, which encourages bicycle riding. And we did all kinds of really interesting live stream fundraisers, and they got all the revenue from that. So coming out of the pandemic, we've been having so much fun with that. We didn't want to stop. And so I do something now called The Art of Community, which is a monthly series that I produce in cooperation with the Chamber of Commerce, where we just bring usually the executive director of a local nonprofit on stage to talk not so much about what their organization is doing, but about things like, you're doing really hard work. You're facing sometimes some really dark stuff out there in the world. It could be homelessness. It could be hunger. How do you stay inspired? How do you learn what you need to learn to run your organization? How do you prevent burnout? What are your hopes for the community? What do you think the community should know about the population you serve that they just don't get about them? And we have these great half-hour conversations, and then we break it up, and it's just an in-person gathering for people from the nonprofit sector. They could be board members, volunteers, staff people, whatever, and we just have like a half-hour social hang, and we have coffee and cookies, and that's on the the last Tuesday afternoon of each month. So it's just, I guess the connection that I want to make, like, why would Caffé Lena do that? The reason that Caffé Lena wants to do it is because the songs that are on the stage and the folk music tradition is all about people on the margins. Right? And it's about everyday life. It's about real life. It's not about glamour and fame and romance and stuff like that, but it's about the stuff that we hope for and care about and have been through and have to endure. And so we sing about it all the time. And I wanted to say, like, well, what's it really look like out there in the real world? Like, how does this live in our communities today? And so that's kind of how we started this connection and this telling of the story of the community in a slightly different way. And the big cap on it every year that we've been doing for about 3 years now is called True Songs. And True Songs features 6 different nonprofits, and we go out to a nonprofit and we say, is there somebody who has really benefited from your work in the last year who would be willing to share their story publicly? And we take that person, we pair them with a songwriter. They co-write a song, And then the performance consists of all these different people getting up on stage in first person telling their story of what they've been through. And then the songwriter sharing the original song they've written for the person. It's True Songs. It happens every November. It's a really beautiful show. And the past shows are up on our YouTube channel if you want to check them out.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Speaking of YouTube, so where, if people want to find you or they want more information, where can they find that?
So I would start with caffelena.org. And Caffé Lena is spelled with a double F, which is the Italian spelling of cafe. Okay. And so it's caffelena.org. And from there, you can jump off to all of our social media channels, our YouTube channel, our Spotify playlists. You can see everything that's coming up in terms of shows. And there are sample videos on most of the pages. Don't worry if you haven't heard of somebody. Read about it. Maybe listen to the video, maybe don't. Maybe just show up and you don't even know who's playing and take a chance on it. And you might discover something that's really special to you.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for coming in and taking the time to chat with us. And appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. And thanks for doing this service and just letting people share what's happening in their town. It's really cool.
It's important. Thanks again.
Thank you.
The superpower that every citizen has is the ability to control where they spend their time, money, and attention. By focusing these on supporting local businesses, you are having a profound impact on your friends, your family, and your local community. So if you want to change the world, you can start with buying local.